such a time as this, I have been prepared. It's my time to serve the Lord. For such a time as this, I came to earth, and with Christ I can do all things.
You know, it's so long ago, but I still remember it. It was almost like a fairy tale. Susa, that beautiful city, I mean. Flowers of all kinds bloomed there. Rare birds found refuge in trees and shrubs. And all the homes had fragrant gardens attached to it. Palace. The palace was just magnificent. Many sections of it were open to the sky because of the pleasant weather. And the king of this nation was rich and beautiful, so powerful. His reign included 127 districts, all the way from Ethiopia to India. But despite this giving you a feeling of a fairy tale, my story is far from it. Instead, it reeks of the synagogues and the ovens that would burn much, much later in Eastern Europe. Yes, Susa was a beautiful city, but it was also full of gossip, just like any other big city, isn't it? And even in my protected existence, I heard about this unbelievable act of Queen Vashti. She refused to come before the king and his banquet guests when they were under the influence of much wine and merriment after a long time of feasting. Everyone talked about it. Everyone had an opinion about it. But the end of the matter was that Vashti was removed from her position as queen. And after that, I forgot about it. I thought it didn't concern me. However, quite a while later, it touched my life in a major way when I was chosen as one of the contestants for the position of queen. Not that anyone asked me whether that is what I wanted. No, I just did what I was told. I was an obedient girl. It wasn't hard though. My cousin Mordecai, he was just such a nice man. He took care of me ever since my father and mother died. And he treated me like his own daughter. What was hard though, is when I had to move from my own home into the palace. My first impression of the palace was that it was exceedingly beautiful, but also terrifyingly strange. All the luxuries overwhelmed me, and I just felt so scared and so lonely. All I wanted to do was flee back home. But that wasn't possible. So I tried to cope the best I could. That is, until I found a friendly face in Haggai, the king's chamberlain. And as time went by, his presence became just as comforting as Mordecai's had been. I just knew that he was on my side in this strange place, and he took good care of me until it was my turn to go to the king. But before that could happen, there were so many preparations. For instance, treatment with oil of myrrh, with sweet spices. There was special food for me. And also, I had to learn how to behave in the presence of the king. But because I trusted Haggai, I listened carefully to his advice, especially as that important day came closer. For instance, I was allowed to bring things with me when I went from the harem into the king's palace. But I didn't take anything else but what Haggai suggested. And then the moment was there. The door opened and I entered into the presence of the king. And the king was pleased with me. So pleased, in fact, that he made me, a young Jewish girl, his next queen. Not that he knew that I was Jewish. Mordecai had told me not to talk to anyone about it. Now, for a few years, all went well, until the king took a liking to a horrible man called Haman. And Haman's ego became so inflated by his success that he expected all of the king's subjects to bow down before him. And when my cousin Mordecai stubbornly refused to do so, Haman became enraged and planned revenge. Then someone told him that Mordecai was Jewish, and Haman knew just what to do. Not only was he going to kill Mordecai, but cruel Haman hatched a plot to do away with the whole Jewish race. With flattery and half-truth, he manipulated the king to sign a decree for the extermination of the Jewish people. The king even gave him his own ring and an amount of cash to advance this evil decree. Messengers went out all through the kingdom to spread this news, while Haman and the king were sitting down to drink together. But Susa, my beautiful city Susa, was bewildered and confused. The news reached me that my people were under sentence of death. I was devastated, and in my anguish, I didn't know where to turn. Mordecai had torn his garments, put on sackcloth, put ash on his head, and was wailing loudly and bitterly in the city. And I knew why. Because I also felt as if a sinister presence had entered the kingdom, as if the spirit of death had finally come and found us here. And darkness was encroaching from everywhere. A darkness that reminded me of the stories of old, of enemies like the cruel taskmasters in Egypt, of Midianites, of Philistines, of Assyrians. But always there had also been Amalek, the Jew haters. And now again there was Amalek. For Haman was a descendant of Amalek. I made contact with Mordecai through my trusted servant Hatak, and Mordecai could only suggest one solution. I had to intervene. But how could I? Nobody even knew that I was Jewish. Mordecai himself had told me not to talk to anyone about it. And yet now he said, go to the king, beg for mercy for your people. But to go to the king meant that I had to disclose my background. And I was afraid of his reaction. Would he be angry because I hadn't told him earlier? Would he despise me now? Would I see in his eyes the same hatred and disgust that I'd seen before when people were dealing with Jews? The same hatred that possessed this man, Haman. Then there was another problem. For I had not been called into the presence of the king for more than 30 days. To go to the king meant that I would face the threat of death. My position was very uncertain. Vashti had been removed from her position as queen without any mercy. And the laws were clear. Anyone who invaded the privacy of the king without his invitation was to be put to death. And that included me. All these events caused me to mature very quickly. You see, up to then, someone else always made my decisions for me. But now suddenly, I had to make up my own mind. Yes, Mordecai could advise me, but he could not do it for me. And I must admit, I was so tempted to step back, to stay detached, not say anything and escape death. Mordecai warned against that. Don't think that if you are silent at this time, that you will be the only Jew to escape, he said. Help and deliverance will come from somewhere else, but you will perish. And who knows, but that you have been called to your position as a queen for such a time as this. For such a time as this. But I was afraid. I did not want to face this fight. I wanted peace. I just wanted peace. The darkness that surrounded me from everywhere just paralyzed my emotions more and more. I needed help. And there was no help. I was all alone. I paced in my rooms like a caged animal. I cried until there were no tears left. And then I became still, very still, and I listened. And I cried out one more time. But this time I cried out to the only one I knew I could depend on. And that's when all the confusion within me just broke. Suddenly, I realized this is where the battle begins. The battle begins by putting fear to flight. And the battle was won. Not by fighting, but by surrendering. I had to come to a point where I said, if I perish, I perish. But I will do what I have to do. And that's when the light came in and drove out all the darkness that had made me so afraid. And the truth erased the lies that kept me paralyzed. And you know, I thought again of stories of old. But this time, I remembered who had been the one who always delivered and helped us when we cried out to him. Yes, peace settled in my heart. And I could face the future, no matter what it would bring. I sent a message to Mordecai. I told him to get all the Jewish people together and fast for 3 days and nights. And I would do the same with my maidens. It's the kind of fast that's done by Jewish soldiers before a battle. For this was a battle, believe you me. I can still remember what happened after that as if it was yesterday. I see myself walking through long corridors that seemed never ending until I came to the hall where the king was. And the king was surrounded by people who all demanded his attention. And I just stood there, willing him to see me, hoping he would not see me. Wanting to escape, but knowing there was no escape possible. And then finally, the king turned his head and looked at me. My mouth went dry, my limbs went numb, and I could hardly hear anything because of the sound of my own pulse in my ears. Would I be found worthy to be admitted into the presence of the king? Would I be admitted? And after what seemed to me an eternity, but must have been only moments, the king took his scepter and reached out to me. Yes, I was admitted. I could still hardly hear anything, but I could see the king was speaking and he was waiting for me. And then, trembling all over, I walked up to him, knowing I must not fail. Oh, I must not fail. And then I heard my own voice. If it pleases the king, would the king, together with Haman, come to a banquet that I have prepared today? And I could breathe again. Yes, the door to salvation for my people was slightly open. But I knew this was not the time nor the place for my important request. I had to control my emotions and not act in haste. Then during the banquet, the king asked again, like he had done in the throne room, "Esther, what is it that you want? Tell me, and it will be granted." I tried to feel my way into the situation. Would I speak now? But no, I felt. Not yet. I had to buy more time. And so I said, if it pleases the king, would the king and Haman come back tomorrow, and I'll prepare another banquet. I felt so foolish at the time. But in hindsight, it was divine guidance. For during that night, the king couldn't sleep. And he asked one of his servants to read to him from the chronicles of his reign. And just then, they came to the part where it was written how Mordecai had discovered and exposed the plan to assassinate the king. And when the king realized that Mordecai had never been rewarded, he decided to take action. And just then, Haman came walking in. And the king said, Haman, what shall be done for a man I want to honor? And Haman, self-centered Haman, thought that he was that man. So he suggested a royal robe, a royal crown, and a royal horse, and a procession all the way through Susa, with one of the nobles in front of the procession proclaiming, this is what is done for a man the king desires to honor. Oh, I can only imagine what Haman must have felt when he found out that Mordecai was his man, and he, Haman, was the noble who had to honor Mordecai in that way. Haman, who had erected gallows 23 meters high to hang Mordecai from. Oh yes, the pieces of the divine puzzle were slowly coming together. Then there was the next banquet. And this time, I felt freedom to speak. If it pleases your majesty, would you grant me my life and that of my people? For we have been sold into death and destruction. If we would have been sold only into slavery, I would have kept quiet. Although even then, the damage done to the king would be more than money could ever cover. The king was astonished. What are you talking about? He asked. Who would dare to touch you? Finally, I could point at Haman. That wicked man there. He is our enemy, I said. Haman turned as white as a sheet before me. The king looked from me to Haman, jumped up, went into the garden. Then Haman fell down before me, stretched out his hands, begged for his life. But I was repulsed by the presence of this man. And I pulled back from him. Just then the king came back in and thought the worst. What? He roared. Will he even assault the queen in my own rooms? And that was the end of Haman. Haman was hanged from the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. His wife and his friends had been right when they said to him, if this Mordecai is a Jew, your plans against him will not succeed. Pull back, for it will turn out fatal. Then everything changed. Mordecai became powerful instead of Haman. But I had to go one more time before the king. This time, to ask him to reverse that evil decree against us. However, that could not be done, for it was ordered in the king's name and sealed with his ring. But it was decided to counteract it with a decree that was so powerful that we got relief of all our enemies. And then there came a time of joy and feasting, gladness and celebration. And you know, up to today, it's still celebrated by the Jewish people when they have the Feast of Purim. The Feast of Purim starts with prayer and fasting, but then it moves into feasting and gladness. A feast to remember that evil did not win, that light pushed out the darkness, and that light and life overcame death and darkness. However, this is not the last chapter of my tale. The last chapter has not been written yet. For yes, Haman is dead, but the spirit of Haman is still very much alive. It's been at work ever since creation, and it still finds its way into the hearts and minds of wicked people. And just like me, you will find it a fearful thing to oppose this evil spirit of death. Yes, hatred is dangerous. But remember, in the end, it always turns against the one who nurtures it. We may lift up the banner of God's Spirit against this evil spirit of wickedness. God himself, with his mighty right arm, will fight for us and will defend us. Evil shall not prevail. And you know what? Life has overcome death and hell. And I have to tell you who did that. It was Yeshua. His name means salvation. You know him probably as Jesus. Jesus came as the Son of God and the Son of Man on this earth, and he opposed death and hell itself. And he also did it, not by fighting, but by surrendering. He died a cruel death on the cross, but gained in that way forgiveness of sin for all mankind. He rose again from the dead, and in that way, he gained eternal life. It's a gift for everyone. It's a gift that comes from God. It's a gift for all mankind. But it's like any other gift. Unless you accept it and make it your own, it will be out of reach. So the last thing I want to tell you is accept the challenge. The challenge to surrender. Surrender to God. Surrender and accept his gift of forgiveness of sin and eternal life. If you do that, you also will not need to fear Like me, you can put fear to flight. And like me, you can have that peace in your heart, a peace that surpasses all understanding. And you can face the future, no matter what it will bring. And therefore, I want to leave you with the word shalom. It means peace. It means peace be with you.
I have been prepared. It's my time to serve the Lord for such a time as this. I came to earth and with Christ